or a potential threat to the nation, so they were kind of forced into this direction to kind of corner this potential incoming threat. And this it led to kind of the projects that you spoke of earlier, MK Ultra, I guess Operation Bluebird and Artichoke and all of this.
Right. I mean, this is what triggered this response was the case of the American soldiers coming back from Korea, who appeared to be in a trance and who were denouncing the United States and apologizing for their role in the Korean War. This made the intelligence people back in the United States extremely nervous. They thought that there was some weird Asian powers of the mind that were being used to cloud men's judgments and to cloud the minds of these soldiers, and it made everyone extremely nervous. And it led to the novel by Richard Condon called The Manchurian Candidate, in which these soldiers, hypothetically, had been captured by the North Koreans, turned over to the Chinese and the Russians for experimentation and mind control operations, and sent back to the United States as assassins. So they would be programmed assassins. So with a certain keyword or a key phrase, they would go into their assassin mode and kill a presidential candidate. What's interesting to me, of course, is that a movie was made of this novel, The Manchurian Candidate, starring Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
It was pulled from distribution after the assassination of President Kennedy. The producers felt that perhaps there was some strange connection between the film and the assassination, and there was some worry that they had actually discovered what was really going on. So that movie had not been released for a very long time. The director of the film was having a dinner party at his Malibu beach house in June of 1968, and his guests were Bobby Kennedy and Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. And what happened that night was that Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So now we have the connection between the Bobby Kennedy assassination and the director of the film, The Manchurian Candidate. So again, everybody gets nervous and thinks there is some connection. Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, of course, become central figures the following year when Sharon Tate is brutally murdered by the Manson family. So we have all of these strange threads of human cultural life, assassination and murder, all attending a dinner party by the director of the film The Manchurian Candidate on the night that Bobby Kennedy is murdered. So you ask yourself, is this the result of conspiracy? We don't think that the director of the film was involved in a conspiracy involving Manson and Bobby Kennedy. So we have to step back and a little bit and say to ourselves, well, what is this? What does this represent? Yeah. And for me, it represents the confluence of these forces. It is coincidence as evidence of the existence of a darker force in history.
Oh, that's very interesting, because I keep coming back to that kind of question all the time regarding Hollywood and the actors and the themes running throughout the, I guess you could refer to it as the occulture or something like that. Always coming back to that idea, whether or not this is consciously driven or unconsciously. But I guess we could go back to the phrase art imitating life and life imitating art, and then round and round in these circles we go, I guess.
well yes, but for me the problem is more serious. For instance, we can use a phrase like life imitating art, but it's a little bit like using the word coincidence. It's a word that scientists like to use when they don't have an explanation. And I think that there is an explanation. About 70 years ago or so, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung was in correspondence with Wolfgang Pauli, the famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And Pauli was having a series of dreams which were initiatory in nature. And Jung was essentially analyzing him. Pauli was on the verge of a kind of nervous breakdown. And what happened was Jung and Pauli began to together research the phenomenon of coincidence, which they called synchronicity. And their conclusion was that there was something going on a physical state that existed, a kind of quantum state, in which what we term coincidence is actually the result of the actions of various forces. And that such things as the I Ching, the Chinese divination system, or astrology, or dreams, or practices of the occult were all somehow evidence of the action of these forces. So Jung and Pauli, and we're talking about a psychiatrist on the one side and a physicist, a hard scientist on the other, who after all did win the Nobel Prize, actually believing in the existence of these forces. So towards the end of my trilogy, I go into this in greater detail. I try to understand how quantum theory and quantum consciousness may actually be used to describe what's happening in history. And not only to describe it as though it was a phenomenon apart from us, but that it's a phenomenon in which we play a role, which we play a conscious or unconscious part.
Yeah.
So that these really are occult forces in that sense, and that the magicians and their grimoires were actually doing something that could be scientifically proven.
The reflections of these forces, I guess in many cases are, I guess could be considered to be in quotes here, evil in that sense. But do you think that they always get this? Or are they always presented in that way, or their expression is dark in that sense? Are there positive sides to all of this too?
Well, I think so. I think that these forces are presented as evil by the power structures in our society that want to make sure we don't dabble with them. I don't believe that they're evil necessarily in and of themselves, but they've been painted that way. And I think the reason they have been is to keep the rest of us from using it, from consciously becoming involved. It goes back to my theories of reality itself. The word reality in English has roots, Indo-European roots, which comes from the same root as the word for royal. Even in Spanish, real, the word real can mean either real in terms of reality, or it could mean royal.
Yeah.
We're talking about the king determining what is real and what isn't. Things that exist outside the kingdom are considered not real. They're in the realm of fantasy. They're in the realm of imagination. Only the king gets to decide, what is real. Yeah. And I think when it comes to the occult, it's up to, in our society, people who become involved in the occult are marginalized. They are considered outside the kingdom. Yeah. They're dealing with things that are not real, quote unquote. And I think that's a political decision.
Sure.
From my point of view, that's all politics. That's got nothing to do with the actual processes themselves, which to my mind are more scientific.
Since writing and of course researching for your book, I mean the term evil or the word or the meaning behind it in that sense, do you feel that this is something that you have come, any closer to in regards to understanding it, what it is and so forth?
To understanding evil, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. I think evil is a heavily loaded word. And what is evil for one person may not be for another. I think what we're trying to do in Sinister Forces is understand the nature of evil itself. Is evil a separate entity? Is evil simply a case of imbalance, as the Chinese Taoists may want to look at it? Or is there an actual force of evil in the world? I think that there are people who manipulate these forces for their own ends. I think the Kennedy assassination as an example, I don't want to belabor that as the main thing, but I think the Kennedy assassination is an example of the operation of evil forces. Because from my point of view as an American who grew up during that period, the assassination of Kennedy marked the beginning of a downward spiral for our country, from which we've never really recovered. And what's interesting to me is that the people surrounding the assassination of Kennedy were people involved in the occult and the paranormal. We had a group that we refer to as the Nine, which is the subtitle of the first book of the trilogy. And here we have some of the wealthiest families in America. We have the Astors and the DuPonts and the Forbes, all engaged in a seance in the 1950s in a farmhouse in the Maine woods. And these people are summoning some sort of extraterrestrial forces. And it involves some of the most important people, not only in American blue-blooded money, but also involves them people who were involved in scientific research and psychic research. For instance, Arthur Young was included in this seance, and Arthur Young was one of the inventors of the Bell helicopter. He was very involved in military research. He dropped out to pursue studies of ESP, yoga, and the paranormal. What's interesting about this is that his daughter-in-law, a woman called Ruth Payne, was the woman who was living with Marina Oswald and taking care of Marina Oswald's children, while Lee Harvey Oswald, the assassin of President Kennedy, was getting his job at the Texas School Book Depository. I mean, there's a direct connection between the Nine and Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah.
And that's not the only connection. The man who introduced Lee Oswald to the Paynes was a man called George de Mohrenschildt, a Russian nobleman, sort of pro-fascist type who was a CIA contract agent, who was also intimately involved with the group of the Nine around Arthur Young and Andrija Puharich and some of the other major players. So Lee Harvey Oswald was essentially surrounded by people who were involved with this group of mystics, in a sense, who were contacting extraterrestrial forces in the woods in Maine in the 1950s. They were all still in touch, and Lee Harvey Oswald was there as kind of their guest. It disturbs me. The entire juxtaposition of the events is very disturbing.
Oh, yeah. Indeed. I mean, this is fascinating. The Nine is a fascinating, topic. As you say, that your first book is entitled "The Nine" in the Sinister Forces series, and could we also refer to the Nine as an extraterrestrial force, or when you say the Nine, are you talking about the nine families or members of the human group here?
Well, they're essentially identical. What happened that night of the first contact was the forces said to them, "We are Nine, and you are Nine," essentially identifying them with the forces themselves. So the 9 people who were at the seance were being identified with these 9 supernatural forces, as if they were the channels or the human representatives of these forces. And that was the implication of the seance and of the transcripts that we have of that seance. So it's bizarre, to say the least. The fact that we have Forbes, DuPonts, and Astors all present, I mean, these are the names that to Americans represent old money. I mean, John Jacob Astor, his family, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and all of these things. And Forbes. I mean, John Kerry, his middle name is Forbes. He comes from the same family, the same background. So, plus Arthur Young's wife, who was a Forbes, her close friend was a woman who was the mistress of Allen Dulles for many years, the head of the CIA. So we have yet a further connection. So when Ruth Payne, the woman who was staying with the Oswalds, or the Oswalds were staying, she went and visited Arthur Young and the family in August and September of 1963, only a couple of months before the assassination. And yet this information never comes out during the Warren Commission hearings, the testimony, when Ruth Payne was talking about her background and what she had been doing and what she had been trying to do. Allen Dulles would cut her off every time she got close to this information because he was part of the Warren Commission, one of the commissioners. So what is this all about? Do we look at a conspiracy of individuals, or do we look at some kind of supernatural cabal that was behind this terrible event in American history?
I get the sense kind of that these families, in that sense, kind of are operating, I guess, as the administrators of, if we are to just talk about America in this sense, I mean, these are powerful families in regards to industry and politics, just as you say. And do you think that they actually might have risen to that rank in regards to, their wealth and fortune, so to speak, because they actually have had this kind of contact with other beings, if you will?
It's an interesting concept. I don't know quite how to answer it. I know that where the Astors are concerned, the Astor family, of course, is famous on both sides of the Atlantic. There are the Astors in the UK and the Astors in America. It's the same family, just 2 different branches. I know that during the Profumo affair, which also took place in 1962 and 63, in which a minister of defense in the United Kingdom was found to have been involved with a call girl, and the call girl was also sleeping with